So today I'm here in front of some empty bookshelves because I wanted to go through all the books I've read this year except for, all of those books because we're done with that. We don't need to do it again. I kind of thought it would be fun to do it in order from worst to best, but I would have to come up with fun categories and I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be mean to people who put their heart and soul into writing books. So instead, I'm going to go chronologically, what I read first to what I'm reading now. And I want to answer two questions like, who would I recommend this to if I would recommend this to anybody? And will I keep it or will I put it in the donate pile, which is going to be right here? I'm going to donate this stack. Hopefully, I could do a before and after and I could tell myself how much I'm going to donate. If you just want to know my top 10 books, I'll just put up a little card at this time step and you can just skip to that time step. You won't have to watch me talk about some of the books I might not have liked as much. Okay, let's get started. So the first book I started the year with is Love Theoretically for a video on my main channel. This is a romance book where shockingly a theoretical physicist falls in love with an experimental physicist. How could that happen? Oh my goodness. I did not like this book, but I think I have to keep it just because I spent so much time with it. I don't recommend this to anyone. No, that's not true. If you like Hallmark movie style romances, I would recommend this book, but not to someone who's going to know the science enough to be annoyed with it. So yeah, I'm going to keep this one though. Okay, the next book I read was a library book. It's called Natural Causes by Barbara Ehrenreich, and it was about aging. So I think she wrote this when she was like 80. She's since died. And this book was about the medical system when you are aging. The idea that someone who's 85 needs to get a mammogram twice a year, even though they're 85. They're gonna die within the next 5 years. Do they need to be treated for cancer? Do they need to spend the last 3 years of their life poisoning their body with chemotherapy drugs, even though their life is ending anyway? Do you know what I mean? Treating someone for cancer at age 11 or age 55 is very different from making a 92-year-old woman undergo chemotherapy. Do you know what I mean? And she talked a lot about that. And I found this book really interesting because I have that same opinion. I don't want to spend my last 2 years of life in a hospital getting cancer treatment if I'm 85 and I could just do that at home. Do you know what I mean? However, I realize that I'm saying that as a relatively healthy 30s woman, and maybe I would change my mind. Maybe I would get scared in my 80s and maybe I would be do everything, keep me alive. I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was a really interesting book and I would recommend that one. It was a library book. Next, I read Orlando by Virginia Woolf. I already talked about this on my channel. I did not like it. I found the writing really fun, but the story was just lacking. And what was the point? I would not recommend this. I am going to keep it because I think maybe Virginia Woolf is someone I would come back to and try to read again. I read 2 Virginia Woolfs this year and I really liked her prose and I also like her nonfiction, so I think I will keep my whole Virginia Woolf collection. I'm realizing now I didn't say what this book about. So Orlando is about a rich guy who's kind of an asshole and one day he wakes up and he's a woman and now she's kind of also an asshole, and it's kind of fantastical realism, but also nobody cares that this gender swap has happened except for the legal ramifications of being a woman. But also, I remember being very disappointed with how Virginia Woolf addressed the differences in men and women. So yeah, that's what this was about. I'll keep it. I wouldn't recommend it at this moment, but maybe I'll read it again. Okay, so the next book I read was The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. This is a post-apocalyptic, I want to say young adult adventure book, and I found it refreshing and interesting and unexpected, and I enjoyed it, especially the ending, and I would recommend this. I am going to keep it. The next book I read was The Master by T.H. White. I absolutely do not recommend this book. It is garbage. There is a lot of racism in it, and it's very of its time. I think, so this book is about 2 children stumbling upon an evil lair of a rich, evil aging billionaire who has, it's not telekinesis, it's telepathic powers, and it it also reads like a young adult book. Exactly what you think is going to happen happens, but there's a lot of racism in this book. I think when I reviewed this book, I said that I thought it would be good if someone else took a crack at it. Like, you know how a lot of times people rewrite stories? I think this could be good. I am going to keep it just because the cover is really interesting. Next is We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. How did I do on that pronunciation? I loved this book. This is a book that was written in Russia, and it is very obviously a huge inspiration for 1984 by George Orwell. It is a dystopian future novel. Everyone's wearing uniforms and everyone is like registering to have sex time. It was really good and I really liked it, especially if you like that kind of book. I'm not doing great on my donate pile yet, which is still at 0. We'll see. Okay. Oh, actually, perfect timing, because the next book I read is Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. Now, I love Edith Wharton. I hated this book. This is about, it's a love triangle between the 3 worst people in the world. I do think I want to read this again, but I hated this copy. I don't know, Banana for Scale. It's a very small book, and I don't like reading this size book. I like a bigger book. I hated it, though. I am definitely donating this, but like maybe if I found a better copy, I would reread it again. I have to. Okay, next I read a bunch of sci-fi short stories by Ted Chiang. It's called Stories of Your Life, and I bought this because the short story that inspired Arrival was in this book, and these were great. The problem with short story collections, of course, is that some of them are better than others. I enjoyed reading this overall, and when I read the Arrival story, I cried like twice. So I'm keeping this, but also I loved it. I do recommend this. Okay, next I read 84 Charing Cross Road, which is a true story, kind of a memoir about World War II England or post World War II. Let me see. Yeah, it's post World War II England, and this American woman is writing to a bookshop in England requesting books that she doesn't have access to in America, and she sends them packages, and it's kind of this beautiful love story between this woman and this bookshop owner, but it's like platonic love, friendship. It's really beautiful. It's a really quick read, and I really enjoyed it, especially Helene, the main character. She was so sassy and fun. I would recommend this. I think it's nonfiction. I think these are the actual letters, but I really liked it. Okay, next is R.U.R. by Carol Chapek, and did I pronounce that right? Carol Chapek? And this is a play. I love reading plays about robots, and I loved it. It's a play about, human hubris and robots overtaking them, and then the robots begin to act human. Exactly what you expect. It was great. It was very funny. I really enjoyed it. I would love to see someone put this on. I recommend. I think you can tell I like short books. Like, that's what I gravitate towards. So next I read This Is Pleasure by Mary Gateskill. And this was a weird little book. So this book is about, it's kind of in the wake of Me Too, a man gets canceled from his career where he's very established for being weird to women. And it's told from the perspective of a woman who is his friend. So she's kind of grappling with the weird things he did to her and whether or not that was appropriate. She's grappling with observing him do it to much younger women. And it was weird. It's interesting to read a story from that perspective, from not the person who feels harassed, but from someone who put up with it, someone who's his friend and is kind of like, well, that's just how he is. But see, I don't like that. I don't like that type of person. So this did make me think. I really did enjoy it. I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure about it. I'm keeping it though. I liked it. Next, I read The Female Man by Joanna Russ. I loved it. This is a sci-fi story about these different worlds where men and women have made different decisions in how they're treated, and it talks a lot about the patriarchy and how that affects women's role in her life and her jobs and her family. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. There's a big battle at the end, so that's kind of fun. I recommend this. Next, I read The Stepford Wives, and I loved this. I've made a video about this on my channel. We all know what this is about. That's what the video was about. That's what I said. The Stepford Wives is about a woman who moves to a small town and things aren't what they seem, and her husband wants to turn her into a sex robot. I loved this book. Even though you already know the story, if you haven't read it, I feel like you should read it. It's very harrowing. You know what's going to happen the whole time, and it happens anyway. It's really good. I recommend this. I'm doing terrible at donating books. I wanted to clear up my shelves. Oh, I'm going to put some of these back. I know people have all these different ways of organizing their shelves, but wouldn't it be funny if you kept them in the order that you read them? Oh, it's going to be fine. Okay. So next, I read True Grit by Charles Portis. This is the story of a 12-year-old Maddie who needs to defend the murder of her father, and to do that, she goes on this wonderful Western adventure. I loved this book, but specifically, I listened to the audio book, which was read by Donna Tartt, and it was amazing, and it was brilliant, and I loved this. If you've never read a Western, well, actually, I would recommend A Lonesome Dove, but also this. This is very good. I really enjoyed this. I'm keeping it. Next is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This was from my sci-fi books. I struggle with things like this. Like, I don't think I'm going to read this again, but do I want to keep it? Like, it's a classic. What if I want to reference it or something? This is the struggle of someone who likes to have books around, because it's like I could also just, I'm sure this is on the internet, I could just look it up. I think I'm going to keep it. Next, I read Gentlemen Prefer Blondes by Anita Luce, and I also loved this. It was very funny. I can't believe it was written in the 1920s. It is about, so this book is about Lorelei Lee with an interesting backstory, but she's a gold-digging woman, and she just takes advantage of men, but she doesn't really know that she's doing it. It's like she just thinks that's her role in society, and you see all these men fall all over her while they're funding her lifestyle, and it was really good. The sequel I started reading and did not finish because it wasn't nearly as good. I liked this. I will never read this again. I think I can donate this one. So that's 2. Look at me, donating books by only female authors. That's great. The optics of that are great. Next, I read The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. And I thought it was fine. I got a lot of comments when I said I thought it was fine about how I didn't know enough of the history of this region to understand it, and I would agree with that. And I definitely think if I did know that, if I was learning this book in a course, I think I would have enjoyed it more. Like, that's the only way I read Shakespeare. I only read the editions where they have, like, the notes, so I can understand what's happening, and I think that would have improved this read for me, because I saw a lot of religious stuff, and people in the comments were like, no. So, I am going to keep this. If I ever learn more history about this part of the world, I will read it again, but also I'm going to keep it because it's very pretty. Isn't this just a pretty cover? Although it's got the deckled edges. What is that called? I hate that. I hate this. It makes the book look cheap. But the cover is beautiful. I'm gonna keep it. So this is editing Angela popping in to say I forgot a book here. This is Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. It's a kind of self-help book. One of my goals this year that I haven't even talked about at all on this channel was to read less self-help books. I read a lot of self-help books. I don't know why. I don't find them helpful. I just, maybe one day something will fix me. That's why. This book was a lot like his other book, Digital Minimalism. I don't remember anything specifically from this book. I can't recommend it. It was a library book. I think Digital Minimalism is fine. It talks about how to reduce your online time, which I think is important. Okay. So next I read A Canticle for Leibowitz. This is a sci-fi book. A post-apocalyptic religious group is in charge of storing and not really doing science, but they're storing scientific documents. And I also really, really liked this. I made a whole video about this. People disagreed with my opinions on this, but I loved this. I would read this again. This is a great book. Next is Boltzmann's Atom by David Lindley. This is a history of the debate of whether or not atoms are real. I read this for a main channel video. The text of the book was weird, but it was really well researched, so I think that's valuable. This is a garbage print on demand book. This is the only way you can get it. I'm gonna keep it, but I'm so mad about it. I'm so mad that they don't tell you on the listings that this is a garbage book. Like, just look at how shitty it looks. Like, I could print this at home and it would look better than this. But the book, if you're interested in this period, I mean, I made a video about it. You can watch my video, but I would recommend this book if this is something you're interested in. Next, I read Willa Cather, Oh Pioneers. I thought I would want another Western. I don't remember anything about this. It's just like the frontier, the dad dies, the woman gets a boyfriend. I don't know. I was bored. I kind of want to keep it though because it's really pretty. How embarrassing is that? I think I'm going to. I mean, I have this space. So next, I read a library book called Days at the Murasaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa, and it was translated by Eric Ozawa. And I feel like this is a style of book that's very popular right now. Translated fiction about like cozy lives in bookshops or coffee shops or tea shops. And it was fine. It was about a woman. I remember the start was really weird. Like, she was working at a company and her boyfriend of like a year was like, oh, I'm getting married. And she was like, what? Like, it was really confusing. She had no idea that her boyfriend had a fiance. And so she goes to stay with her like a strange uncle at his bookshop and she learns to love reading. I don't know. I would think of this as like an airport book. Like, it's fine to pass time. I don't think I would read it again. I know people really like it though, so if that sounds interesting, you might. Oh, I've got another library book. The next thing I read was The House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I listened to this on a long drive and I liked it fine. This is about a woman working in academia, you know, which I love, and her postdoc, it might be a postdoc, is she's like sorting files, like pictures of bugs that they lost the file names to. So she's opening thousands of pictures and typing what type of bug it is. And I loved that aspect of it. But she goes home to her mom's house and like something's wrong. And it's kind of I would say a fantasy book. There's like witches and magic. And I've said this about T. Kingfisher before. I feel like she has really good ideas for books, but the dialogue I find very cringy. Her characters, they're always like witty and sassy, and it embarrasses me. But I did enjoy this book. I enjoyed the world. It's not really magic. It's like, it's magic. Like, her grandma's a bad witch and she has a neighbor that's a good witch. It was fun. Again, I would call that an airport book, like something to pass the time. It was okay. I would not buy it, but it was fine. So next is another library book. I read I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel, and I really, really liked this book. This book was about a woman who is dating a married man, and she is incredibly jealous of another woman he is dating that's also not his wife. And she stalks her Instagram. She tries to meet up with her. And she gets a dog. She goes to spend money. And I really enjoyed this book. This book was a string of books I read this year where the main character was just so unlikable and insufferable. And yet I really enjoyed the book. It was so real. It was very of its time. Like, she's constantly on Instagram and checking what time things are liked. And she was so pathetic. Like, he's married, right? He's never going to be with her. And yet she just kept doing it. It was wild. I did really enjoy this book, and I would read another Sheena Patel. I don't know if she's got anything coming, but I would read another. Next, I read Despair by Nabokov, and this is also about the worst guy in the world. He plans his own murder to get the insurance money, but he's a big dum-dum. and that's the book. This was great. If you like Nabokov, definitely read it. Next is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, and I loved this book. This is one of my favorite books I read this year. This is about a black woman who like finds herself falling back in time, and she ends up meeting her ancestors, one of whom is an enslaved woman and one who is the owner of the enslaved people. And it's tragic, it's shocking, it's beautiful. The writing is so good, and you really feel transported into this time. And there's a really interesting dynamic because her husband also ends up back in time, but he's a white man, and it's really grappling with how what happened to your ancestors can affect who you are, and it makes who you are. And it was beautiful. It was really good. I ranked it kind of low on my sci-fi list just because if someone was like, hey, do you have any good sci-fi, I don't think I would recommend this because it's time travel book. I don't know. I loved it though. I want to read more Octavia Butler, and I don't know if I could ever read this again, but I'm obviously keeping it. I got this at a thrift store. Look, it's gorgeous. This is such a nice copy. So next on my list is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I picked this up for a fun, light little read. Yep. This is about Lenny and George. They're like migrant farm workers, and it's a found family story that ends in tragedy, and you know what's going to happen the whole time. I really enjoyed this book. John Steinbeck has beautiful writing. I love a short book. Like, say what you need to say and be done with it. This was great. Definitely going to keep this, and I do want to read another Steinbeck. I just have not done that yet. Next, I read Miss Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This is Ulysses, but what if she was a woman? So this is just the day in the life of a woman planning a party. It deals with class issues. It deals with a time period. There's a World War I veteran who ends his own life. It was fine. It was fine. I enjoyed reading it, but it definitely wasn't a favorite. I'm really struggling with the fact that I don't like Virginia Woolf. I found a whole set of this style of book of like 6 of her books, and I was so excited, and I gotta figure out why I don't like Virginia Woolf. Like, what's happening? I should like it. I should like her. Next I read War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, and this is, aliens come to Earth. Aliens from Mars come to Earth. It describes the battle. And when I talked about this in the video, I was like, oh, the chapters end really like on a cliffhanger, and it's kind of annoying. And specifically, I said, because this is how they used to write stories, like in serializations. But in the comments of that video, I get a comment like once a week that's like, oh, it's because they write them in serializations. I know. I said in the video, that's why I found it weird, and I thought maybe someone could like edit it to not be like that. I know that they did that. That's what I said. I did like this book though. I liked the astronomy. There's a lot of reference to like old telescopes and stuff at the start, which I liked. I feel like the ending fell off. I'm definitely going to keep this because it's a beautiful copy. I did like it. I definitely liked it. It's interesting to read these old sci-fi and see how they kind of inform modern sci-fi. This was good. It was really good. Next is another library book. I read Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang. This is one of my books with unlikable, terrible female protagonists, just like I'm a fan. And I really liked Yellow Face. Yellow Face is the story of a woman who's an author, and she's friends with a much more successful author, and then her friend dies. So she steals her manuscript and presents it as her own. The problem is that it is about an Asian history subject from a culture that her dead friend was a part of, and she's not. She's a white person. And so it all unravels, and everyone's like, obviously you just stole your friend's manuscript. I really enjoyed reading it. I thought it had a lot of interesting commentary on like the publishing industry and what voices are allowed to be heard, and how mediocre white people are often offended at excellence in minorities, and they think that they're just handed everything because they are a minority. I see that a lot in academia or in science, where it's like someone who's really successful and oh, they happen to be Chinese, someone's like, oh, it's because they just get everything because they're Chinese. And it's infuriating. So the main character having that opinion while stealing the superior work of her friend, I found it really interesting to read about it. It reminded me actually of this movie. God, I'm never going to remember the title of the movie. It had Bernard from Westworld, and it was about a black professor who's trying to get his book published, and his publisher is like, this isn't black enough, and he's like, it's black enough because I'm black, and then he adopts like a character. It's a similar idea. I really liked Yellowface though. I found R.F. Kuang really enjoyable. I actually asked for Babel for Christmas, so I will read another one of hers. I really liked it though. Next is Grendel by John Gardner. This is one of my top books this year. I loved it. It's about Grendel. You know, the monster from Beowulf. I don't even know how to describe this. It's someone who thinks they're a monster trying to understand the world and trying to understand the environment and trying to understand people and humanity and the way things are, and it's about stories and being trapped in a story and unable to prevent the ending, and you know what's going to happen the whole time, and it was wonderful. I'm definitely going to read this again. I loved this book. I would recommend this forever and ever. Okay, next I read Big Swiss. This is a library book by Jen Began. It's about a woman in a small town whose job is writing the transcripts of psychiatry sessions for a local psychiatrist. So she goes around town and she sees the people who are getting this psychiatry. And this is another one of my unlikable female main characters. I hated this woman, and honestly, I did not like this book. I've been getting recommended this book a lot, even since I've read it, and I did not enjoy it. I just didn't get it. Big Swiss is one of the patients, and the transcript writer, like, seduces her using the information she knows, and I just found it gross and weird. And I actually thought that was really interesting, because in I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel, she does this very similar thing, and I also hated her, but I enjoyed that book. I enjoyed reading her being weird. I didn't like Big Swiss. I don't know what the difference is because the books are very similar. Yeah. Next I read The Yellow Wallpaper. This is a short story. I don't think I should keep this. No, I'll keep it. What if I want to read it again? I really liked this. This is about a woman who is on bed rest after giving birth, and her husband, the doctor, is treating her, and she kind of goes absolutely bonkers, and it's really good. It's a really good story. I'll keep it. Next I read Eden by Stanislaw Lem. This was recommended to me by someone on Patreon, and I really liked it. This is about this group of astronauts. They crash land on a planet, and they have to decide between fixing their ship and exploring their planet, and they find some aliens, and it's fun. I would say this is a dense sci-fi. There's a lot of describing, like, scientific apparatus. If you liked The Martian, I think you would like it. I really liked this. Definitely keeping it. Next, I read The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin, and this was also one of my favorite books this year. This is about an Earth army on another planet, like, just doing deforestation, and the native people who live there fight back. And it's really beautiful. It's told from the perspective of the army people and the aliens. And I found the alien people, their culture was so rich, like their language was described so well. I really liked this book. This is one of my favorite books this year. Recommend. I'm going to read another Ursula K. Le Guin, I think, soon, hopefully. Okay, next is Pudd'nhead Wilson by Mark Twain. I'm definitely going to donate this. I always think I'm gonna like Mark Twain. I find him funny, but I just never enjoy the books. This book is about twins who are switched at birth, and, like, it's a criticism of racism, saying that racism is stupid because the children, one of them is white and one of them is black, but they're so identical that they can be switched, and someone does fingerprints and solves the mystery. I always think I'm gonna like Mark Twain, but I don't. And next I read A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. This is a man who dies and goes to hell and is a library, and he's not allowed to escape until, I guess it's not hell, I guess it's purgatory. I don't know. He's not allowed to escape until he finds the book of his life. I liked this book. I like reading about different versions of hell, and it's a short little guy. I really liked it. Next, I read the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard. This was for a video on my main channel, and ooh, a bookmark. I'm losing all my bookmarks. This was mostly a recap of things we know happened after watching The Next Generation. I bought this because it came out before they announced the show Picard, which of course changes all the things in here. It was fine. I like Star Trek. It was fun to read. I don't think I'm gonna reread it, but I also think I'm gonna keep it. I'm sorry. I just like Star Trek. Next, I read Wait by Jeanette Winterson, and this is a retelling of, would you call this the Atlas myth from mythology? I love Greek mythology. Of course, I'm one of those people who read a lot of Greek mythology as a child. And I also like some of the modern retellings. I find this one completely unmemorable. Often when someone retells a myth, it's for like a reason. Like there's a modern nugget of moral or commentary in it. And I don't remember anything about this. And when I went to put this in Goodreads, I had already read it like 5 years ago. So I'm going to donate this one, and I'll probably buy it again and read it again. I didn't like it very much. Next, I read a graphic novel called It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth, an autobiographical novel by Zoe Thorogood. Let me show it to you. I really liked the art style in this book. This book is about, well, it's about Zoe Thorogood, and it's a depressed 20-something woman just trying to get through it. And I found that very relatable. There are moments in here that very much feel like a 20-year-old woman doing something, and it was hard to read just because I'm so glad I'm not like a 20-year-old woman anymore. I did really enjoy this. I would read more from her. I really liked the art style. It changes from page to page. This was great. There's also a kind of sub-story about someone who's trying to be successful in a very competitive field, and I liked that as well. I thought this was good. Next, I read the memoir of Patrick Stewart called Making It So. I read this from my Star Trek video on my main channel. I talked about this a little bit. I'm definitely not going to read this again. Someone who is fond of Patrick Stewart would be excited to see that at the thrift store. I love reading memoirs. I really do. But a lot of memoirs are not very good because, and I feel so bad criticizing someone's life story, but I feel like memoirs are only good if you're doing a lot of self-realization and you have character growth in your memoir. This very much felt like a list of things that happened to Patrick Stewart, which is just not interesting. I mean, I'm sure Patrick Stewart has things to say, but it wasn't a good memoir. And I'm never going to read it again. And so I'm going to donate it. Oh my god, there's like 2 equal size stacks to go through. We're halfway through, guys. Okay, next I read Peach by Amanda Green, and this is what introduced me to the Bitter Southerner, and then I bought a bunch of their magazines. And this is just like a lovely little book of photos and poems and recipes about peaches, and I really enjoyed this. I don't know if this is like a reading book, but it's like just an art photo book. Like, look at that. This is just gorgeous. I love it. I'm gonna keep it in my life. Next, I read The Hatred of Poetry by Ben Lerner. And this is also one of my favorite books of the year. This is an essay about the hatred of poetry, and I am a former hater, and I wanted to try to get into it. So I got this book, and I loved this little essay, and it made me try poetry. I realized that this is probably like, this is the essay you give to an undergrad, like a 19-year-old freshman in college in a class called So You Hate Poetry. I get that, but, you know, I'm uneducated on poetry, so I loved this. I thought it was fantastic. It tricked me. Okay, I should describe my problem with poetry, which is that I feel very uncomfortable reading poetry because it feels like a very sincere, earnest, like soul-bearing thing, right? And oftentimes poetry is really bad. So the combination of someone bearing their soul and also it being not very good, like, cringes me. Like, I don't have anything bad to say about people who write poetry. It's just how it makes me feel is bad. And in this book, or in this essay, he talks about how all poetry is bad. Like, even the best poem doesn't achieve what the author wants. He talks about the insufficiency of poems to accurately describe, like, the beautiful nature and song, and changing my perspective on poems really allowed me to read them without feeling bad. Because if the poem is bad, it's just because they couldn't accurately describe what they were feeling. And I don't know, is this embarrassing? That was my reframe, and now I can read poetry. And I read some poetry this year. I really love this. If you hate poetry, I would recommend this. I read it twice. I really enjoyed it. I will read it again. Okay, next I read The Mustache by Emmanuel Carrere. And I've already talked about this book on my channel. It's about a man who has a mustache and he shaves it, and everyone's like, you never had a mustache. I liked it. It was fun. And next I read The Factory by Hiroko Oyamada, and it was translated by David Boyd. This is a story told from 3 different perspectives of this weird factory where everyone has jobs, but the jobs are like shred paper. And so no one's doing any work, and it's kind of like, what are we doing with our lives? Like, why are we working when this work is meaningless? And I loved this book. It was great. So I read The Hatred of Poetry. I was ready to give poetry a shot, and I saw this book at the thrift store. I thought it was beautiful, so I bought it. It's called What Kind of Woman? Poems by Kate Baer. I did not like these poems. I really tried. I read them all, and I don't know. This is kind of my problem with poetry, is often it's just like, there's a lot of stuff in here, like poems about body image, and it feels very shallow. Like, there's poems about parenting, but it's not about parenting. It's just the daily thing of parenting, and I just felt like this is all you have to say. I would not call this Instagram poetry. It's not like that, but it's just like, I don't know. I didn't get anything out of this. I'm gonna donate it. Okay, next I read The English Understand Wool by Helen DeWitt, and this is a tiny short story about true crime, almost. How the media takes advantage of people who are victims. This was really good. I really recommend this. I don't want to spoil it. Although someone told me Helen DeWitt wrote The Last Samurai, and they said it was really good. So I did buy this at the thrift store, and I hope to read it. I really liked The English Understand Wool, though. I thought it was good. Okay, next I read Fair Play by Tove Jansson. There's no way I'm pronouncing that right. This book is a wonderful little short book about old lesbians who are like in their groove on what they do. They're both artists and they love each other, but they want to do other things, and they're kind of talking about it. And I loved this book. It was great. It was a great book. Okay, next I read Nothing Personal by James Baldwin, and I love this. It's just an essay. It's an, how do I want to describe it? It is an essay about like casual white supremacy and racism. So this was my first ever James Baldwin, and I loved it. I want to read more James Baldwin. It was so beautiful. I'm gonna read you a quote so you can get an idea for what I mean when I say it's so beautiful. 4 a.m. can be a devastating hour. The day, no matter what kind of day it was, is indisputably over. Almost instantaneously, a new day begins. And how will one bear it? Oh my god, it was so good. I loved this. I need to read more James Baldwin. Next, I read Sipsworth by Simon Van Buie. And this book, this is a book about an old woman whose husband and son are dead, and she's kind of just wrapping up her life, and then she finds a mouse, and she finds the will to live, and she meets lots of people who admire her for her personality and her talents and like what she's done in her life, and she kind of renews her life. And I cried. It's really saccharine, and I think if I read this at any other time, I read this when I was having like a sad month. I read this and it was so sweet. If I read this like right now when I'm totally fine, I would feel very cynical. I'm gonna keep this. I can never reread this because it would ruin it for me. I found this really sweet, but I mean, it was just really sweet. I liked it. I recommend it. Next, I tried poetry again. I read Dog Songs by Mary Oliver, and these were a lot better. But, I mean, okay. So, this is just about dogs. I love dogs. And there is a poem on this page. Look at this poem. I'm going to read it to you. This is a poem about Percy. This is a poem about more than Percy. Think about it. Like, I hate that. What is that? That says nothing. I hate it. There was some good stuff in here. I don't think I like this Mary Oliver. Maybe I'll try a different one, but it was better. But no. But then I read Emily Dickinson, Final Harvest, and this, holy shit, guys, read Emily Dickinson. I bought this because of this YouTuber. So they mostly do science videos, which is why I think it's in my feed all the time. I'm definitely subscribed. But there's this Emily Dickinson video, and I was like, hey, I'm reading poetry. I should get Emily Dickinson. I'll link the Emily Dickinson video below. And I loved this. I loved this so much. There's so much in here. There's so many capitalizations and like hyphens, and like they're short, but they really like in Dog Songs, there's that garbage short poem. In this book, Emily Dickinson can write 3 lines and make me be like, holy shit, oh my god, I love this. This is one of my top books this year. I'm so thankful to this YouTuber and to Ben Lerner for telling me about the hatred of poetry so I could read Emily Dickinson. I think I'm in love with her. Top 10 book of the year. I loved this book. So next I read Julius Caesar. I read this for my Star Trek video. I loved it. I really like Shakespeare. I really like reading plays, but earlier I said I only read Shakespeare when it can be explained to me. This is what I'm talking about. So like they have little notes so you get the jokes and you understand what's going on. This is my preference. This is how I enjoy Shakespeare because I want to get the jokes. And if I'm just reading the weird text, I won't get it. And this helps me get it. And I do like this. I liked this play. Hey, next I read The Discovery of Insulin. This is a book about the discovery of insulin by Michael Bliss. I read this for a main channel video. It was my second or third time reading this. If you're interested in nonfiction, this is just a great story about the history of diabetes, about the discovery of diabetes, about science, about who gets credit for what, and about how science can change the world. This is a great book. I do really like it. Here's the video, I think. Did I do the Nobel Prize video about this? I don't even remember. This is a great book, though. Next, I read Howl's Moving Castle. I feel like everyone's seen the movie, but this is about a woman who gets turned into an old woman by a witch, and she seeks the help of the wizard Howl. It is a kid's book. Like, I would say middle grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. Maybe younger? I don't know, kids. This was cute. This was my first Diana Wynne Jones book. I liked it. I don't think I'm gonna keep it just because it's a kid's book. It was fine. It was a nice fall read. I did enjoy it. I haven't seen any of the Studio Ghibli movies, so maybe I'll watch that instead of reading that again. But it was cute. Okay, next I read The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This is a horror comedy satire, I don't know, about the final girls who are like left over after a horrible event. You know, like everyone at the summer camp gets murdered and then the one blonde girl is there and saves the day. What happens after? Except that's not what the book is about. I like Grady Hendrix. I will read more from him. I am going to donate this. Someone who likes horror might like it more than I would. It didn't do what it said it was going to do. I didn't like it. Next, I read Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, and it was, of course, like the older short stories, the first version of a short story is not going to be what I expect it to be. I appreciate it for what it was. I will never read it again, and I didn't really like it. Next, I read another graphic novel, Beowulf. That's funny. I didn't realize it until now, but like one of my favorite books this year was Grundle, and I also read this book, which is, I think, a young adult book, maybe? Maybe this is even children's, but this is a graphic novel about Beowulf and like kids fighting. It's the story of Beowulf, a modern telling of little kids in a clubhouse, and it was great. I really enjoyed it. It's about childhood and honoring your childhood, and I loved it. It was really good. I'm gonna keep this. I will even read it again. I do think it's a children's book though. I really enjoyed it. The art's really nice too. Like it's really, it puts you in the mood. I really enjoyed this book. Next, I read Something Wicked This Way Comes. This is also a children's book. This is a Ray Bradbury. It feels like a Twilight Zone episode. There's a carnival and these kids go to it and mischief happens and they have to save the town. I don't know if I would recommend this to, like, maybe a young teen who's never read any other book, but this is, it's exactly what you think is going to happen. It feels like a Goosebumps episode. I did like it. I really like Ray Bradbury's writing, but it's kind of a young adult book. Next is more poetry. I read The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman, and this is after I read The Hatred of Poetry. This is after I read some not so great poetry and I got to Emily Dickinson and I loved it, and I found that I really enjoyed this. So I saw her do this in 2021, is that when it was? I saw her do this at the inauguration, oh god. And I mean, how are we alive? Why are we pretend? It's fine. And I felt the same, like, I mean, obviously proud of her. She's very young. She's doing a great job. What a hero. But it's poetry. And I remember watching it and being like, oh god, I hate watching poetry. But I've learned to appreciate it, right? And I read this and I loved it. And then I watched her do it again on YouTube and I still loved it. So yay. I think I like poetry now. This was great. It's devastating now, but it's great. And I love her. Go Amanda Gorman. That's amazing. We're down to the last pile. Oh my god. Is my throat going out? This is a problem. I've already talked about this book. It's A Wizard Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. Also happened to be a young adult book. Also a garbage print on demand book. I hate when that happens. This is about like a fantasy world where witches have specific special powers. Our main witch has baking special powers and her familiar is yeast. And this is the thing about T. Kingfisher, is that her ideas for stories are like, oh, I'm in there. I love that. And then the execution, it's just, I don't like the dialogue of these characters. I'm going to donate this. I think someone would be excited to find that. It was fine. I like T. Kingfisher. I would read more. But it's kind of like a library, not a buy situation. Next, I read Outline by Rachel Cusk at the beach. I loved this. I loved this. This was so good. It reminded me of, what are those movies called? Like the Trip movies? These, you know what I'm talking about. Like, it's just a woman for 3 days having conversations with people, and it reads like a play. It reads like a play, and that's why I loved it. I can see why people don't like these. I loved this book. I am gonna read more from Rachel Cusk. So next I read Persepolis, The Story of a Childhood by Marjane Satrapi. Am I pronouncing that correctly? This is about the true story of a 12-year-old, I think, in Iran during the revolution and right after. It's a graphic novel. It's beautiful. It's beautifully like illustrated. It's beautifully written. I think this is a true story. This is a woman reflecting on her childhood, but I think she does an amazing job writing what a child is like. Like, it's a very realistic portrayal of a child, which is why the events of it are so haunting. And reading this right now, or this year, I guess,
It hit pretty well. Everything happened so quickly. Like, she's in school learning French. 2 years later, she's not allowed to go to school. She's covered up. Her parents ship her off to Italy. Like, this was really, really good. I really enjoyed this. I have not read the sequel. This was one of my favorite books this year. It was beautiful and terrible. And next I read Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. This is a story of sisterhood, a story of magic, a story of being a woman and what that means and your responsibilities towards your family. It's also a movie, and I liked the movie better. This was fine. It's different from the movie. If you really, really like the movie, you could read this, I think. I'm just gonna watch the movie in the future. I think we're good there. Next, I read The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey. And this was written in the 1920s, which is crazy because it reads like it was written 2 years ago. It is a mystery book. Like, there's a famous, like, Sherlock Holmes style detective, but he's injured in the hospital. So instead of being able to go out and solve a mystery, he solves a historical mystery. And it's really fun. It's like a romp. It's really easy to read. I would also call this an airport book. I really liked it. I'm amazed that this was written in the 1920s, but I really enjoyed it. And also, this is one of those books that was like sitting on my nightstand for a year. And I was like, I'm going to read this. It seems good. And then as soon as I picked it up, I just flew through it and finished it. This is great. Next, I read So Long a Letter by Mariama Ba. And this is one of the books that was in my shame stack, and I read it. This is the only book from that stack that I read this year. I loved this book. This book was amazing. So this is about women in Africa and how they're treated by their spouses and divorce. So one woman, her husband is like, I'm going to take a second wife. And she's like, absolutely not. We'll just get divorced and I'll go have a business and I'll do whatever. And another woman undergoes the same experience and she just kind of deals with it. And so it's a really interesting description of the lives of African women and how they handle what is expected of them. And it was beautiful, and also it was short, which I love. It has a happy ending, and I would recommend it. Okay, next I read The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. Boys go trick-or-treating on Halloween and they meet the devil. Exactly what you think is going to happen. Also reads like a Goosebumps book. I really liked it. It is for kids though. I really like the cover. I think I'll keep it. I don't know. See, this is my issue. So next I read The Ghost in the House by Sarah O'Leary. This is a woman dies and wakes up 5 years later as a ghost in her house, and I loved this book. I made a video about it. I'm keeping it if you can find it. It's from Canada. I have like a library copy. I loved this book though. It was great. Next I read The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell. So this is a book of essays by the woman who wrote Sounds Like a Cult. And I remember listening to that book on audiobook and I thought it was fine. And I saw this cover. I just thought it was a really pretty book. I did not really vibe with any of these essays. There's a lot of, I don't know. I read this book and I really felt like it should have been a podcast. Like, there's just random things happening and then she just cites a random study and she's like, see? And that doesn't make it research or journalism. And there wasn't really enough meat to make it an interesting personal essay. And I didn't get anything out of it. I am going to donate it. Someone will like it. Okay, next I tried more poetry. Depression and Other Magic Tricks by Sabrina Benham. And this was not great. This I think is Instagram poetry, right? Like, I didn't, to go from Emily Dickinson, where you see the spaces and the dashes and like how every comma feels purposeful, and then this just feels like padding. Also, I thought it was going to be about depression, but really she's like sad that her boyfriend broke up with her, and it's not, like, she does seem depressed in the poems, but also like it's just about a relationship, which is not, yeah, I did not vibe with this one. Next I read Penance by Eliza Clark. I haven't talked about this on my channel. I loved this book. So it's a true crime, unreliable narrator story. And, oh, Sheena Patel said it was gripping. Because she wrote that other, I loved it. Okay, I really enjoyed this. I loved the writing. I loved the story. I thought it paced really well. I'm gonna definitely read more from Eliza Clark. I didn't really like the true crime part. Like, I'm just not interested in true crime. I'm gonna keep this though, and I want to get her other book. I really liked it. I recommend if you are interested in true crime. I read I Shall Not Be Moved by Maya Angelou. Poems. This is great. Right? Like, this is crazy that I'm just like, oh, you know Maya Angelou? Like, honestly, she's great. This was great. I loved it. Poems that feel very impactful and meaningful, and you can see I like bent the pages on a lot of the good ones. I loved this. It was great. Next, I read Can You Ever Forgive Me? Memoirs of a Literary Forger by Lee Israel, and I just grabbed this because it was like a short book. I thought it would be interesting. It's just a woman who fakes letters. Like, she goes to libraries and copies letters from authors because it's the past, and she just makes them up and then forges their signature and sells these around, and like the whole thing kind of crumbles around her as people start to realize like how is she getting all of these, and she goes to prison. I don't know. It's I don't know, it's just not that interesting of a story, and I can't believe it worked. And she doesn't have commentary on it, I guess. Again, that's my problem with this type of memoir. Like, this is what happened. Here are the events. Here are the letters. And it's like, okay, but what did we learn from this? What do you have to say about this? Like, give me more. Otherwise, it's just a list of things that happened. I think I'll donate this one. This is a pretty good pile. We're doing it. So next, I read The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I love this book. I loved it. I made a whole video about it. This is a top 10 book this year. I loved it. I want to read more from him. I loved it. I love him. This was great. Oh, should I say what it's about? So this is kind of a book about writing, but also about personhood. He travels to Africa. He travels to the South where his books are being banned, and he also travels to Palestine, and he talks about apartheid, and you know, it's really, really good. It was really good. I loved this book. It's really timely as well, obviously. Next, I read Orbital, which is I'm really proud of myself. This is the only Booker Prize book that I read, and I got it before it said the Booker Prize on it. I calls it. This is the first year I've paid attention, so like 100% right now. This is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. It won the Booker Prize. It's a little book that takes place in one day with a bunch of astronauts as they go around the Earth, and it's fantastic. It's not sci-fi at all. It's just human stories, human interactions, like how people, I don't know, like you put people in space and it's really common for them to like have this broader view of the world, like we are all one. And so there's a lot of that in here, and it's a really beautiful snapshot of people and their families and their lives. And this is also one of my top 10 books this year. I loved this. It's like huge. This book is huge, but so small. Am I selling it to you at all? I don't know how to describe it. Really good. Top 10 book this year. And then I have a whole bunch more library books because I'm back at the library. I had a thing where I kept books for too long, and he sent me a letter and they were mad, and I finally brought them back and we're on good terms again. So I'm back at the library at the end of the year. I read and talked about in my Northern Kentucky book trip video about A Well-Trained Wife, which is, who's it by? Tia Levings. And it was fine. It's about a woman escaping like a religious abusive environment, a memoir. It was good. It was good. It's just, as I said in that other video, I feel like I've read that before and I'm tired of reading it. How can we stop it? I don't know. Then I read The Guest Lecture by Martin Riker. I asked for this book for Christmas. I hope I get it. I want a copy. This was one of my top 10 favorite books. I loved it. It's about a woman laying in bed, thinking about the lecture she has to give in economics the next day. It's about academia. It's about being a woman. It's about friendship. It's about time. It's about family. I loved it. It made me order a John Maynard Keynes book So I'm going to learn about economics sometime, I guess. I loved it. Next, I read Paul Scheer's memoir, Joyful Recollections of Trauma, and it is there's a lot of traumatic things in that. It was pretty serious. I felt like there wasn't a lot of reflection. Again, that's my problem with memoirs. It was fine. It was fine. Then I read Notes on an Execution by Dania Kukafka. Am I saying that right? I loved it. I loved it. I loved that book. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was really well done. I liked the characters. I liked it. I wouldn't buy it. I would recommend it though. I really liked it. And then the last few books I've read I haven't talked about yet. I read Role Play by Clara Drummond, and this was so weird. It was also a really small book. I got it from the library. It was about, oh gosh, I think she's Brazilian. I'm gonna look it up so I don't sound like an asshole. It is. It is in Brazil. She's in Rio. And it's about like class struggle and like upheaval of government, I guess. So she's like a wealthy woman who's like never had a real job, and she talks about how she's just middle class, and like the things she has are just because like they had to sell 2 of their cars when they were kids. So it's about kind of class warfare and like government upheaval and how that affects the upper class. So our woman is like a mid-30s woman, and she's incredibly privileged and wealthy, and her parents bought her an apartment, and she's never had like a real job. And the whole time we're reading her thoughts where she's like, but it's a shitty apartment, and it's not fair that we don't have as much money as other people, and it's in a shitty part of the neighborhood, and like I'm not privileged. And she witnesses a woman who sold beer from her cart get murdered by the police. And the rest of the book, I don't know, it's crazy. Like it's another insufferable female protagonist, and she keeps thinking about this woman she saw get murdered, and she's like, I didn't even know her name, and like I'm an asshole. But then she's like, no, it's probably fine. This event that she witnessed and did nothing to stop like kind of keeps bubbling up in her, but she keeps pushing it off with like, but I'm not that wealthy, and I didn't grow up that well. And it's horrifying. It's horrifying that someone could exist like that, but it felt so realistic. It was really, really good. I recommend it. It was a really good translation too. I'll put up which version I read. Okay, the next book I read is called Fee by Alexandra Fuller, and it is a memoir of Alexandra Fuller. I think has written multiple memoirs. She grew up in Nambia, and so she's got an interesting history. And this book specifically is about the very untimely death of her son, who dies as like a young 20s, and how that affects her family. And I just didn't like it. I don't know. This is gonna sound so shitty, but I read it and I kept thinking that it wasn't a memoir about her son. It was just her own feelings about it. Like, it seemed selfish. Is that crazy? Like, obviously it's a memoir, it's selfish, but you know, it's going to be about her. But it just seemed like this is your opportunity to share your son with the world. And all you talked about is how his death affected you, but he's dead. And I don't know why I read it that way. I found the writing pretentious, so it made me not like the author, and so maybe I was looking for flaws in it, but I really didn't vibe with that book. It feels bad to say a memoir is not good, because like that's what a memoir is. I really didn't like it. But that's okay, because the next book I read was one of my top 10 this year. It's called Rejection by Toni Tilamute. Is that correct? And I just read this like a week ago, and it was fantastic. Like immediately top 10. I loved it. I'm gonna look for a copy of it. I loved it. This is kind of short stories, but they're all together. They're all in the same universe, and they wrap together about people who are rejected. And it's shocking. It's so good. If you read one from this, like Grendel, I loved Grendel, but also Rejection. Like, the first story is called The Feminist, and it's about that guy who, you know, that guy who, like, uses feminism because he thinks saying he's a feminist but not actually being a feminist will help him get laid. And it was so realistic, and it was just, like, icky to read. And also, I should warn you, there is a chapter in this book that I totally skipped because it's just very graphic kink sex that I was uncomfortable reading. I'm just like a huge prude. It's really embarrassing. And like I was red in the face and I was like, I'm just gonna skip it. Just a warning. I mean, read it. It's a really, really good book. But there's that section. And then the ending. I'm not gonna spoil it. The ending of this book blew me away. I need to read everything by this author. I loved this book. Top 10 book this year.
So this is editing Angela from the future to tell you that I did in fact go to my local bookstore and buy this book, and I just wanted to here's part of the stuff that I skipped just to give you an idea. This was a fantastic book. I loved it. Please check it out.
Next, on the total other end of the spectrum, I read Rewitched by Lucy Moon, who is a YouTuber that I follow, and I saw her talking about these books that she was writing. She's writing this book, and so I saw it at the library, and I was like, oh, I'll check it out. And it's a very cute little story about a witch in a community, and she has to do a witch test, and it was like really cute and sweet. I would describe it as like a similar, like, kind of Hallmark movie, like sweet little book, and it was nice, and I enjoyed it. It was nice. It is December 14th. I am reading Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky, this book, and I'm reading it right now. I have like 50 pages left, and I'm really loving it. It is about a robot who he murders his master, and I don't want to spoil it. A robot murders his master, and he has to grapple with that. And I don't know the ending yet, but I'm really loving this book. It's a great way to end the year, although it's only December 14th. So who knows? So that's everything I read this year. Here is my top 10. I recommend all of these. Let me know what you read in the comments below. If you ever see me in real life and you have read Rejection, we'll talk about it. I loved it. The ending, man. Okay. Let me tell you. So I've got this stack of books to read as like winter books, you know, the next few months. I have The Shining, and I feel like this is just going to be a winter book. I do love this movie. I know the book and the movie are not very similar. Or I heard that. I don't know. And it just feels like a winter book. I've been doing the mood reading thing where it's like, oh, it's fall, I'll read witchy books. Oh, it's winter, I'll read Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga. Okay, this is a Polish name. Choka Krux? That was bad. Here, somebody, how do I pronounce this? But this looks great. It won the Nobel Prize in Literature, so I'm not the only one to think that. I don't know what it is about, but it's in Poland, and I think it's a murder mystery. And it feels wintry because it's cold in Poland in the winter. I'm really excited about this one. So this is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. And I kind of really like this cover, although now all the books I have that are introduced by Neil Gaiman, it's just like, dude, now I have to deal with this. Now I have to think about this all the time. I don't know what this is about, but I was looking at Ursula K. Le Guin books because one of my favorite books this year was The Word for World is Forest, and someone was talking about this book, and they said that it was wintry, and I was like, oh, perfect, brilliant, perfect. And then I have this book. This book has been on my to-read list for a very long time. It's called The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna, and I think it's about a family in Alaska doing a thing. And one time I downloaded the audiobook, and it was like 42 hours, and I was like, I can't. But they're in Alaska. They're going to be cold. It's a good winter book. So I mean, obviously, I'm not the best at reading the books I say I'm gonna read. Like, this is my list, but I also have a huge stack of library books that I could read next. I don't know. But yeah, I feel like this year's reading was really good. Except for, I read a lot of nonfiction that I didn't really enjoy, but this year in the fiction category, my goals led me to a lot of books I wouldn't have read otherwise. I don't know what I'm gonna do next year, but most of these books are books I have not read yet. So I think one of my goals has to be to read the books I have and to not buy nearly as many books. But they're at the thrift store and they're like $1. Happy New Year, guys. Maybe I'll probably post again before then. It's the middle of December. What am I doing?
This stack. Hopefully I could do a before and after, and I could tell myself how much I'm going to donate.
To read the books I have and to not buy nearly as many books. But they're at the thrift store and they're like $1.